Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Ho Chi Minh City. We still connect virtually, and I wish to see our guests face to face one day. So today is a beautiful day, and we have a very special guest, Miss Laura, and we are so happy to have her on the show. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining our Insight Sharing sections. And we would love to hear more about your story, your motivations, and your currently working subject and objects, and that's going to give us a lot of motivation throughout the day and upcoming time. Yeah. So Laura,
Awesome.
would you please share with us a bit about yourself?
Yes, but first, please thank you so much for sharing this space with me. I've been looking so much to spending time with you both. And I know it's been a couple of months in the making, but I'm really excited to finally connect and be here with you. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Our pleasure, Laura.
Yeah, so thanks for asking about my story. So I am an organizational psychologist. I have my PhD in applied psychology, and I've had the opportunity, as I think back on my career, to really be able to build the career of other leaders and help them in that journey. And that's kind of been the red thread of everything that I've done. I'm also a mom of two boys. We have a new puppy, and life in the U.S. I'm in Texas. Is fun and a little hectic. We're closing out our summer and about to start the school year again. So lots of things to juggle. And for me, in my career, my husband and I are both kind of dual career. So we both have always had high achievements for ourselves and for our family. And we find that there is lots to juggle, and there's lots to try and figure out and to navigate. And so throughout my career, I've really tried to, and as I coach, as I, lead big organizations, I spent most of my career in corporate America. Working as an executive in a Fortune 50 company, and then in the C-suite. And throughout all of that, growing a family, there's been times, right, like everyone else, where what comes next, and you have to make trade-offs. And the things that I've always rooted back into have been my values and how I lead. And that became just even more apparent in the pandemic for me. Just like lots of other people, right? It's what is most important right now. And I found myself talking to my team and my big C-suite job, explaining to them how we are making different decisions in the business, how I was making different decisions for our family. And it all rooted back to my values. And as I continued to talk about it and talk about kind of that leadership, I realized I kind of have been doing this my whole career, and it kind of lit a spark for me to teach others and coach others how to do the same. And so as I reflected back on kind of what mattered most to me and what sparked my interest and my motivations, it went back to my values of growth, development, and advocacy. And in my big C-suite job, I had that to an extent, but I didn't have it in an impact that I wanted. And for me, that looked like more connection to leaders. Because in my job, I had connection, but it was very downstream. So I wasn't seeing the impact up close and personal. And so I thought back, when was the last time that I felt that connection to these leaders? And it was when I was executive coaching. And so I decided in the middle of a pandemic to leave my big job and to start the Catch Group, which is a consultancy that we have leadership development and coaching offerings for leaders to get more authenticity and diversity in the C-suite jobs and top jobs at organizations. And so that's now what I do full time. I coach leaders and I coach organizations to lead with their values, to create inclusive cultures. And it has been so fun to dig into this work at the individual level and the group level. And so I've been digging in on that. And as I built out that content, I realized, hey, this is something that we can kind of scale. And so that's when we decided to prioritize the book Values First, which just came out in April.
congratulations for the book launching. Is a lot of my executive friends. They always wanted to do that. When there's two things that they would want always to do when they was when they retire. One is having their own company when they were young, so that they can have a different kind of impact. And number two is writing their own book. And many of them didn't didn't got a chance to do either one. And but then you accomplished both of them. You got into the C-suite level, and then you decided to drop everything and start your own firm so that you can have a different kind of impact. You wrote the book so that the impact can go farther onto the communities and across borders. So we congratulate for all that accomplishment, Laura. And and with that, I would want to bring you all the way back to when you were young. Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Because if you connecting all the dots back, it looks like that the value is something that always inside of you and always there, that pushing you to do something meaningful for you and for others. And so when you were young, what did your dreams when you grow up? You're gonna do what kind of job? What kind of uh, role you're gonna introduce to the world?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it's an important one because sometimes, our values are absolutely shaped by how we grew up. And so I am one of four kids. I'm the third of four, and kind of like the middle child because I'm the middle girl. And for me, growing up, I was the one that got all the good grades. We all did pretty well in school, but like if that was the thing, that was my thing, right? So as I think about how that relates back to my values, that was my value of achievement showing up like very early, right? And then I would also say, my parents are still married. They've been married for over 50 years. And in the United States, that is very uncommon. And so I saw them, a model of, a family unit. So family is also one of my values. It's very important to me. And I saw my dad, like he was a leader in nonprofit for most of his career, and then went back to get his MBA. And he was working his nonprofit job. And then at night he would study and he would go to class, and I would see him, and it took him many years to do that. But I remember this pivotal time, this memory that I have of, he would set up in our dining room that we didn't use very often, but he would study in there to get a respite from the loudness of our house, right? And so he would study, and at one time I went in there and I said, what are you reading? And he was like, well, why don't you read this section? And so I read it. I was maybe 10 or 11. And he made me feel connected, and he gave me time, and he made me feel smart. And he said, hey, you just read an MBA level textbook. What do you think it means? And he took time, and he talked to me about it. And I just I felt special, and I felt like, oh, I can do this. And so that's kind of where I think back in the value of, achievement and development and growth and learning, right? And I think back to just like watching him, study and accomplish those things, and then seeing him graduate and be able to use his degree and his role to be an executive director. And so I was able to have role models like that in my immediate family, right? And so as I think back to like what I even wanted to do, just like every other little kid, I wanted to be a ballerina or a princess or whatever. For a minute, I did want to be an author. I used to make little books like for family members for presents. We still have a couple of them, and that was kind of creativity for me. But very early on, I actually knew that I wanted to go into psychology, probably in early high school. And I had a really great guidance counselor, and we talked about like what are the kinds of things that I might like, and I just really wanted to understand people at a more in-depth level. And I was able to take a psychology class very early in high school and just really liked it. And so very early on, I wanted to be a social psychologist. And then once I got into undergrad, I realized, there's lots of different kinds of psychology. And so I majored in psychology, and I minored in journalism and creative writing. So that was kind of still a red thread, the whole writing creativity through that. Then I went to school for experimental psychology and realized that I did not want to actually be a professor, which is funny because now I'm an adjunct professor, so it all comes full circle. But I didn't want a life of academia because I took another class that was called Industrial Organizational Psychology. And I love the fact that it could be applied directly to the organization. And I could see an immediate impact of some of the work and some of the ways that individual leaders and organizations could utilize some of the systems and processes and theories of psychology and how it can impact work. I mean, we spend so much of our time at work, right? And so it's just it was a really interesting kind of application to all of the psychology theory and classes that I was taking. And that's where I decided to go into applied psychology.
Wow. I have this question to ask. A lot of people that we know in this region, when they finish university, and it's like, boom, go to the workforce, and the education part stopped right there. But then you love psychology, and you went all in onto, you get the PhD degree onto the psychology. And it takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of, commitment to get through that. So we want to know the strength and why you're curious to get all the way in like that, Laura.
Yeah, I think it goes back to my two of my values of growth and then achievement. And the more I was in school, the more I realized I don't know anything, and I still wanted to learn about a lot. And I think one of the things you find when you go into graduate school and doctoral programs is that you learn you don't know a lot about a lot of things, but you're getting a very specific specialization in one thing, right? And so I wanted to do really well in that one thing and learn about it and kind of uncover it. And what I loved was that the things that I learned, research methods and how to evaluate programs and how to understand psychology at the individual and group level, those kinds of things translated really well into broad concepts. So kind of no matter what the industry, I could go in and still, I don't have to be the subject matter expert at, manufacturing or sales or research and development or healthcare. But the things that I learned could be broadly applied in all of these different applications. And that was really interesting to me. So I learned a lot about that. And then that could be applied in so many different places in the workforce. And that's why I really love organizational psychology. And to me, it was that achievement that I was like, okay, what else is next? What's after that? Right. And so I saw a model of organizational psychologists at the time. The idea was get a PhD so that you can accelerate your career once you do get into corporate. And now I don't know if that's such the case. I think there's pluses and minuses to go all the way to your PhD. I think a master's level plus experience is probably what I would do now if I was to do it all over again, right? But yeah, there's lots of different paths, and that's just the path that I took. And was lucky enough to have like really great mentors along the way, kind of teaching me and showing me, and then was able to get into the workforce to then use some of those things. And it's really interesting. Some people, I think, the things that they learned in school, they're not really using. And I can say that I still use everything that I learned in school, in my day-to-day now, still to this day. Research methods, program evaluation, needs assessment, statistics, all of the things I'm still using in different capacities as I work with senior leadership teams and individuals.
Laura, to me, Vivian, you have a question? Sorry.
Yeah, it's just very interesting you emphasize the point is to learn something, how much do you don't know. Not just to learn something that you're gonna know, but what you're not gonna know is very important. So I think that's one thing that we learn from you is to open mind and continuously focusing what you want to achieve. Yeah. So I guess it's just a comment of that because it's interesting that you have many pathway and you specifically choose some point that you want to get that achievement. Yeah. So go ahead.
I think too your point of I'm a continuous learner, so I think we're all in this evolution, and if we ever think we're done learning, then maybe that's a point where maybe that's not your passion anymore. But if I'm passionate about something, I'm gonna learn and I'm gonna keep evolving, right?
Yep.
Even as I wrote the book, that's a point in time. And I would imagine in 5-10 years, I might look back and say, "Oh, that's so interesting that was my perspective." And I would hope that my perspectives would shift over time and evolve as I keep learning, because I don't think we're ever done.
Yep. And then when we say all in, basically you also demonstrate the same thing for the next generation also, Laura. Like your father, he role model in busy work, and then he's continued to learn his master degree so that he can be role model for you. Now you becoming a role model for the people around you also. So great job on doing that. And for all of that learning and all of that mentoring and coaching put you into the corporate Americas and all the way on to the executive and C-suite letter. If you and during the pandemic time, when you decided to move on a new path, if you take a look at all the works that you've been accomplished in the corporate America for those years, what is the most beautiful things that you gain from helping leaders to grow in their roles?
Yeah, I would say the things that I learned from them, really. I mean, I think in any capacity, whether I was doing executive coaching on one-on-one, or if I was the leader of a group, this idea and this theme of continuous learning, I learned probably more from others than I taught others. And I think that's an important thing to realize, right? Like you said, I don't know all the answers ever. I like to ask a lot of questions, right? So I hope that the impact that I made was to be able to, push people to understand their own self-insight. It's less about what I tell you. It's more about what you can figure out about yourself through self-awareness, through getting feedback, through evolution of your own leadership. But I would say some of the biggest lessons through my corporate career is not what I taught others, but like how through the interactions that I had with them, the lessons that I learned from leaders, whether that was about the business, whether that was about myself, my own leadership, how I could show up for other people, right? But it's the moments where I think, wow, those were really great days, were the days that I learned from other people.
Wow. And normally it's very hard for you when you're in the corporate letters and then very successful and decided to stop everything and start a new path where things are uncertainty ahead. So we curious to know, what was your dining table discussion about that at home before you decided to stop and go all in again on the new path?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny. It was a conversation, and the conversation went something like this. I was talking to my husband. And I said, "Hey, when you can do a job, but if you start to think, should I be doing this job?" And he said, "Well, what are we really talking about? What do you want? What do you want to do?" I said, I love my job, but I think I can make a bigger impact. And he said, well, that's exactly what you should do.
Wow.
And so we started planning for it. So it was just that easy. My husband is a biggest supporter, and I think that we do that for each other's careers. But he could see that, I lit up when I started talking about that kind of impact, right? That was where my heart was. And the hardest part was leaving that job and saying goodbye to the team and making that decision. But on the other side of it, it was the best decision. And I think it's the best model for them too. As a leader, I think, and I coach individuals like this all the time, they're sometimes they feel stuck, or they feel like they have to stay. They're very loyal to company, and they're loyal to their team, especially, right? Because they've invested so much time in building this team and building this department or function or whole organization, and they don't want to leave anybody behind if they decide to go, right? Because they've helped so many people, and they want to be there for them. And that's how I was feeling. I felt this big tension. When I made the decision at the family level, that was easy, but the hard part was, how do you decide to leave? What does that look like? How do you do it in the right way, right? How do you prepare others to be okay, and to be okay with, leaving all of the things that you left and that could be undone, right? Because I think that's another thing. We do all this work and we hope that it sticks. But that's a fear too that leaders have when they leave. And the biggest thing that I thought was, I want to be an example for all of the people that I've ever led to follow what you want to do. And if I don't leave, then I'm actually doing them a disservice, right? Because I'm not leading by example. I'm not role modeling that. And making tough decisions is part of leadership. You have to do that. You have to show up and make those tough calls, and especially in your own interest, right? Because often, especially female leaders in my experience, we show up for so many people, and sometimes we're the last ones that we show up for, right? And especially at senior levels, once you're in the C-suite, there's not a lot of levels. You don't have sometimes you don't have mentors internally. You might not have a sponsor internally. And so you're the one that needs to advocate for your own career, right? And so as we decided to do that, I realized I have to be the advocate for this next phase in my career, and showing up for myself, for my family, to do that was the best thing. And hindsight, I'm so glad that we made that decision. And it was the best. It was the best decision for me personally, for our family, and probably for the organization too, because I also could have stayed in that job, but I wasn't 100% all in, right? And if I had this other, inkling, nudging to calling to do something else, if I would have stayed, I wouldn't have been the best leader in that role and in that organization at that time. So I think it was the best decision for everybody. But I think most importantly, it kind of modeled this idea of, lead with what you believe in and be your own advocate for yourself. And sometimes that means making tough decisions, but it is the right thing to do.
How long was it take you? Sorry, Vivian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think similar questions. So you remember all the emotions of the last day of your previous work. Can I ask you if you still remember the feeling of the first day of Catch Group, when all the decisions has made and now everything started?
Yeah. At first, I took a break. I took a little bit of time off, and that was nice. I would say it didn't feel real until I announced what I was doing, like on LinkedIn, made it official. And that day, it didn't feel that. It was interesting. It felt very similar, but also very different, right? It felt similar because I was still in my home office with, a different computer, but still connected. in the same kind of workspace. So it felt similar that way. But then as soon as I started talking about what I was doing, I felt a freedom, kind of, right? A freedom. And then it wasn't bittersweet, but it was still like I still love the connection to people. And so I'm still a couple years in, getting used to that. And now I build connection in different ways. But at first it was a little lonely and but still exciting, right? And then I started building connection in different ways. So I started a podcast and I started connecting with leaders on an individual level that way in experiences just like this, right? And these conversations. I started working with a small team. And that was really great because I just love leading a team. So at first I missed that until I was able to get a couple of contractors and things like that. But and then I started creating, and that creation was a big surprise for me, to be honest. I started creating content and I realized, I had more to say than I thought, and that so I'm an introvert, and growing up, if we go back to that whole idea of you are who you were growing up, I was very shy, didn't talk a lot, just rule follower, people pleaser, all that kind of stuff. And so when I started building content, I realized I was finding my voice, and I loved that, and I started creating different things. And I found joy in that where I didn't think that I would before, and that's been really fun, that idea of building something. And before I realized, I had been teaching leaders based on other people's content, really great content my whole career. But now what I love is this intersection of building leaders, but with my content. And that is kind of the Venn diagram where it all kind of comes together. And it's really enjoyable and fun to be able to see leaders connect to some of the things that you've built. And that's where I find the most joy right now.
Laura, the way that I interpret the conversation today, there's a lot of things that burning from inside of you. Every leaders that you got a chance to talk to coach, also teach you a lot of things, and from there's a lot of things within the framework of organizations that limiting your ability to go to the next level, and that leading to the calling of you can do more than just that. And I'm curious to know how long would that that seed came into your mind for until you make the move finally. How long did it take you?
Oh my goodness, it's a great question. So a couple of years actually. So I originally left a different company. So I was working at PepsiCo for many years and it's such an amazing company and got to build so many leaders. And I was at a point in my career there. I was leading capability for commercial functions all around the world. And it was an amazing job, and it was an amazing team that I worked with. And I was not happy. And I was questioning, like, what is happening? Like, I should be ecstatic right now, but what is going on? And what I realized is that I had done so many amazing things there, but I had stopped learning. I had been in my role for a really long time, for like 4 years at that point. I didn't have a ton of sponsors anymore because so many people had moved around or left the company, and I just wasn't sure what the next step was there. And so I realized it's probably time to leave, but what does that look like? And one of the things I thought about was starting my own company then. And so that was kind of the initial seed, probably in 2017, 2018. And then when I came down to it, it was, I will start my company or I will go into the C-suite. It was really that role that got me to stay kind of in corporate for a while. And so I left PepsiCo and I joined YPO as the Chief Learning Officer because I wanted that experience, right? And I needed that critical experience of building the capability of C-suite leaders and presidents globally. It was a global role. I would have more influence, bigger team, all that kind of stuff. And so that first probably nudge, right? That first inkling of like, oh, what should I do? Probably came as early as that. But I decided, hey, I'm not ready for that. I don't know if this is the right time for our family. I really want to get this other experience. How could I turn this other job offer down? And so I did that for a couple of years. And that's when it kind of started coming back, was in the pandemic, when, you start thinking about, oh, well, this is fulfilling, but it's chaotic, right? The pandemic was the beginning of it. It was just so chaotic. We had our kids out of school because of, all the virtual stuff. So I wasn't sure, was it just the pandemic that was, making everything chaotic, or was it job satisfaction, or both, or what? And after things kind of not settled, but after the new normal, started, and we were doing that for several months and years. I just started getting nudges like, oh, I wish I was coaching more. And so I started doing that pro bono for a couple of leaders. Oh, I had an idea about this. I started listening to more entrepreneurial podcasts, right? You start to spend your time in a little bit of different ways, but it was always like on the weekends or at the end of a really long day, right? And so it was part of the time that I had for my own learning, growth, and development. And that's where that pivotal conversation, that dining room conversation, right? Eventually we started to have it, and then we started to make the plan.
Well, that's the power of being an introvert, right? So you have, you have a lot of time to think and reflect and start to connect on all the dots, and get into new things readily, doing things that beyond your imagination before. But earlier you said that you live your life in accordance to your values. Okay, and more than ever, we see the importance of values. In every corner, every conversation, a lot of talk shows about today's teaching leaders, teaching individuals, teaching family members to know the values and live by the values. So now you're teaching people to live with the values using your own framework, right? And we want to know what's the frameworks for values first. Can you share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, I started on this path of kind of creating, and part of that was building out this framework called the Values First framework. And it's really how I coach individuals and organizations to show up authentically and to create the culture that's aligned to those values. So you can do it at lots of different levels, but what the easiest place to start is your individual level, right? And so the Values First framework is an acronym. It spells out values. So the V stands for Values First. The A is for audit time. The L is for life boundaries. The U is for uplifting others. The E is for experiencing conflict. And the S is sustaining values. Everything that I do and everything that I teach, I really, really want lasting behavior change, right? And so nothing that I do is short term, is kind of one off. So it's really to build in sustainability. And so Values First framework starts with exactly what the name says, identifying your values first. So that's where it starts. And I find that, and you've heard me talk about my values in this conversation, it serves as an anchor. It serves as a point of clarity in a language and almost like a filter to be able to identify what's most important to you, right? And then understanding how are you getting those needs met and how's it showing up in your life. And through the framework, you identify those, you audit your time, how is it showing up, you define success, and then you create different behavior shifts, whether that's mental shifts or physical shifts, how you spend your time, building those life boundaries in alignment of those values. And what I find is that it's not just for work, it's really for life. It's for career, it's for short term, it's for long term. And it takes, it takes time to build some of these incremental behaviors, but once you start doing it, that's where we see people showing up in their leadership as they are. They're showing up more authentically for their families, for their direct reports, for their organizations. They're putting themselves first for once, sometimes making those tough decisions. They might be in more conflict at first because sometimes there's a little bit of upheaval when you start to build boundaries, right? You might have to say no, or you might realize that there's even a conflict within your own values. So for me in my life, I sometimes find conflict in my own values of achievement and family, right?
Yep.
Like that early in career, it was always that. It was like, oh, I want to achieve, I'm going to do this. And sometimes at the expense of time with family. And so through that, I teach how to deal with that conflict, how to reconcile that, again, centering back in your values of what matters most right now, and then building out a plan for then sustaining those over time.
So, and then for each of us, we have different set of values, right? Your values, something that you treasure most may be different than for something that I'm treasuring most. So as leaders, it's going to be even harder for them to, like accommodate the values of the fellows employees that they be employed for. So how can they, make sure that their values, they can still live in that by their value, but at the same time can harmonize the values of the individual that contribute to the success of their organizations? Yeah, can you share?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So if you think about it at different levels, an organization might have values, right? We've seen all of those. Sometimes they're named, but they're not lived within the organization. Sometimes it is really, truly a part of the culture. And what I find is that when we identify our individual values, there is a mapping or something that we need to do to see, where do my values align to the organization's? And I think that's a really important point of reflection. And a lot of people, that's what it was in the pandemic, right? It was like, hey, I thought I was aligned with the organization's values, but maybe I'm really not. And so I think the same is true at then the leadership level. So as a leader, are you, what is the culture that you create, and how are you showing up for your people? And do your values, at the company level and at the leader level, then emphasize for your people what's important to them? It doesn't always have to be aligned one for one, right? So, but as long as there's a little bit of overlap, and that shared overlap might just be the shared company values that you have, right? And what I find that with people that are fulfilled and are more so aligned with at least one or more of the company values, right? And so we can all agree on, oh, we love the mission, right? Or we love how we get the mission done, or things like that. So it's important, I think, for diversity in everything that we do, that we do. So I don't want everybody's values to be the same. What I do want leaders to know and to share is their values, how those show up, and the idea is then modeling your values. And so, I might even have the same values as some of my direct reports, but they mean different things to different people. But I want the idea is to model your values, whatever they are. So if my value is health and wellness, and that's important to me, and I model that for my team, then it gives them the permission to model their own values and to prioritize their own values. So their value doesn't have to be health and wellness too. It could be compassion. It could be family. It could be, making an impact in the community, or adventure, or creativity. But the idea here is that I'm modeling my own values, which then in turn lets others do the same. And hopefully, if we start to chip away at some of this, you have to be perfect all the time. You have to, be 100% on all the time. We're all humans. The pandemic has brought us into our living rooms, our workspaces. We've seen our dogs and our families and our kids run around. And so that I think is one of the benefits of pandemic. But this idea of showing up as yourself, hopefully we can start to bring more authenticity into our organizations, into our leadership when we're not sure about something. When we, if we can start modeling some of these behaviors, then it gives permission for your teams to do it too. So I'm not really interested in people having the same values. I want people to show up within their values so that they can then build these cultures of inclusion so that other people can show up in theirs as well.
Laura, I've been seeing a lot of executive, a lot of leaders actually really doing well at, living up to their values, showing authenticity, right? And but there's a lot of there's a rest of them also in the old leadership style, old management tradition style. But I always believe that inside each of us, we are human beings. We want to be connected. We want to be, doing best for the others. But the cosmetic phase that we're wearing because of corporate image, because of shareholder expectations, a lot of that, make us have a different kind of identities. One is for work, and then one really hold up from the inside. How can we help those traditional managers and leaders to break the ice so that they can start baby steps to show, being authentic and live up to their values and got the acceptance by the people around them?
Yeah, I think it starts at this leader level, right? And I think it's like you said, it's baby steps and it's incremental. So I would say most people absolutely have values. They might not realize what they are, or some. So there's all on the spectrum. There's probably a level of awareness to some extent. Some people are very in tune with what their values are. Some might have an inkling but don't have all the language around it, and some people may not have even thought about it. Right. So I think the first thing to do is to get clarity. Right. And then how does that show up in the culture that you create as a leader? Because I think some of the ways that you've been making decisions is probably aligned to your values. You just don't realize it. And then I think it's about telling people, hey, this is how I make decisions, and this is why I made this decision, because this is important to me. So I would use that in an example of, hey, this is how we could do this work, but it's really important to me to grow and develop the team. So I could do it, but I'm not going to be the only one to do it. We're going to delegate. We're each going to take a part of it. And then we're going to debrief it. We're going to talk about the critical experiences and how we learned and what that was like. And this is why it's important to me, because growth and development is so important to me, right? Yep. And so I think it's giving language and transparent language and just telling people how you're making decisions and how it then connects back to what's important to you. It's giving people context. And I would say, so many people just need more context. They want more time with their leaders. They want to understand why they're making the decisions they're making, how they're making them. They want to see that you're human too, that it was hard for you this week because you didn't get to work out. You should tell them why. And you should tell them about your missteps this week. You should also tell them about, I celebrated and I went on vacation and I didn't bring my computer. Like all these little things are incremental. And if we start talking about them, all of the decisions that we make, and give context and hopefully link them back to the things that are important to us. That is the incremental step that I think that we can all take. And then we start to get better at that, right? We start to build boundaries around the things that are important, right? I've been working with senior leaders for a long time. They're high achievers. They're working a lot. They're working a lot. And some of them have some really great boundaries in place, but many do not. And it comes up often that, I used to run and I don't run anymore, or I used to do yoga and I don't do yoga anymore, or when I was at my best, I used to do XYZ with family. And so if we can start talking about and actually doing some of these behaviors, like you said, incrementally, that's when we start to change some of those behaviors, build new habits, and then again, show and model for others that it's not only okay, but that's what we should be prioritizing. And that's what then changes cultures, right? That's what then gives people the permission to show up and make those decisions for themselves and not worrying about that they have to be on all the time. But I don't know about you, but the days that I have met my, my values of, being with family, getting my workout in, getting some alone time. Remember, I'm an introvert. All those things. I'm more focused at work. I'm more intentional with my time. And I actually get more done in a shorter amount of time. And so the more behaviors that we can build based on that, I think it starts to chip away at some of that kind of traditional command and control leadership that we're really used to. Yep. And it gets back to the human side. And then incrementally we can build and celebrate all of these things together. And then hopefully change and continue to shift towards these more inclusive cultures where we're not only showing up for each other, but we're showing up for ourselves too.
Thanks a lot, Laura, for sharing this wisdom. There's a lot of our audience also will be very benefiting listening to this conversation. I have one thing I want to ask you also regarding to the book. Okay, so you left the organization, create the cash group so that you can make a different kind of impact, the impact in your way, and then April, you introduce to the world another product. This is your book, and make the impact even further and cross all the boundaries. So so if you take a look at the book and all of the chapters in there, if you pick one is really your favorite, okay, what would that be and why?
Oh, my favorite chapter of the book. Oh my goodness. There's probably a couple for different reasons. So in this book, when I started writing it, I told my book coach, this book is not going to have any stories about me in it. It's just going to be, leadership principles and the framework. And, I'm an introvert. I am not going to share personal stories. And guess what? It opens with a personal story. There are personal stories all in this book. So I think, some of my favorite parts are being open and vulnerable and authentic and modeling that, because I'm telling people to do it. And so it felt very hypocritical if I did it myself, right? And so, some of my favorite stories are in this book. The Prologue is one of my all-time favorite stories of how I second-guessed myself. I had imposter syndrome, and I almost didn't apply to a job. And my life would have changed if I did not apply to that job. And so it's very consistent with the research that we know that women, do not apply to jobs if they're not like 100% qualified based on the job description and all that kind of stuff. And in that moment, I decided, I was at a conference, and this is a very long time ago when you had like a paper resume and you would like put it in a box. And to get an interview on site. And I made the decision to apply to this job that I was not qualified for, right? And so at this pivotal moment, I realized, hey, my value of learning and development, I can figure this out, right? And that is the job that I ended up getting and started my career out of grad school. And so made so many connections and friendships in that organization, and that I have to this day. And so if I hadn't done that, my life would be different. And so I think the book is I share many kind of pivotal career stories and relationships and different things that have been important to me as an example. I learned by example, so I wanted to show just different examples of how I've done it or how people that I've coached have done it. And so within the book, there's many stories, but that's probably one of my favorites.
Wow. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Laura. We know. Vivian, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Laura, I guess that a lot of the women would look up to you as a role model, and balancing between a very stressful business, work life, and also to manage a family. Would you please share with us what is your typical favorite day and what would be the balance time that you are doing to maintain that kind of energy? Mm.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. So it's absolutely a partnership between my husband and I, and he probably does more at the house than I do, if I have to say. We also have support as well. So we've had a nanny that comes and helps our family. She's basically part of our family, and so we have lots of privilege because we are dual income. And so I just want to, state that. So it is not being, it is not superhero anything, right? It's being able to kind of prioritize, help really, and to understand that I cannot do it by myself, nor could I if I had to. And so a typical day for us, so we both mostly work from home, and we start our day with our kids and hanging out in the morning, and then we go for a walk in the morning to get out of the house. It's pretty warm here right now, and so we have to do that pretty early. And then, we start our day. We bring the kids to school. When school is in session, we're working. We're getting individual time met. I sometimes even get to have lunch with my husband in the middle of the day, which is really nice. And then we cap off our day at 5 or 6, and for me that usually looks like a buffer of time that I need alone time. I used to have a commute at work where I would get alone time. Well, now working from home, I don't, right? And so I usually take another walk or do exercise at that time to kind of give myself transition time in between working and kind of home life. And I do that, and then we cook dinner together, hang out, and then do kid routine, and then have some time to kind of hang out, just husband and I at the end of the day. And so that's kind of typical work from home day. Sometimes I'm at a client site. Sometimes, one of us might be traveling, but overall, we try and get, connection time and some alone time and some impactful just work time with our teams and with our clients during the day too.
Laura, there's a lot of time that a lot of works that you do require a level of thinking, deep level of thinking. And Vivian and I is in the quest of understanding how people think, and we can get some advice from the experts so that we can help people around us to have a formulation of how they can help them grow in their ability to think. So for you, can you share with us how do you create an environment and that's so that you can think, how you force you to think?
Yeah, I block a lot of my time. So if I find myself, I know what I have, for this week. What are the goals? What am I trying to get done? And so I do a lot of time blocking. I also, on my walks, I love that as thinking time. So sometimes I'm listening to a podcast that's business related. Sometimes I'm not listening to anything. And those are some of those times where I can just think, and some of the thoughts come together so that when I do return back to the computer, I can get focused time there too. And then sometimes it's through conversation. So I am an introvert, but sometimes I still need a connection to someone else. So sometimes it's with a thought partner, whether that's with somebody on my own team or a catch up with someone else, just to start thinking in a little different of a way. I have several kind of entrepreneur friends that I connect with in different groups that I'm part of, that it gives me a time and space for that. So I build in those times very specifically as well, because I either want to get validation or feedback on an idea, or even just, somebody else's opinion that might not have heard about something before. So I think it's all about, for me, it's creating kind of intentional space to think in different ways, and then just being open to doing it a different way.
I see. Thank you. Laura,
Sure.
Last question for today, all right? And so we know your past, we know what you've been doing now, and congratulations for the book. We also want to know if there is anything exciting that you are working on, that you are about to do. you want to share with us and the audience so we can celebrate with you in advance? Can you share?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much. I'm excited to start just bringing more people together based on some of the content. And so I'm really excited. I'm having a live workshop. It's a virtual live workshop at the end of August, focused specifically on building boundaries. And so we're going to dig in and, it's in that sweet spot that I talked about before, this Venn diagram of like helping people at scale, but also with some of this content that I'm so passionate about. And so we're going to build boundaries together to ensure that people are not reaching burnout. So that happens at the end of August, and I'm really excited about that.
Is that the word L in the values? So life boundaries?
Life boundaries, yeah, that's right.
Alrighty. I'm so excited about that. I will get back with you by the end of August and I'll ask how the workshop goes and when, okay?
All right. Yeah, I'd love that.
Laura, thank you so much for spending your day with Vivian and I and the audience of the show. There's a lot that we learned from you, and we hope that you enjoy the conversation as we enjoy learning a lot from you and hearing your conversation too. So we wish you all the best. Please tell your husband and your two boys that we say hello to all of them, and then also tap on your husband in the shoulder and say that he's a wonderful source of support for you, and we want a lot of gentlemen can continue doing that so that there will be equal great very greater rooms for everybody to success. Okay, so, Laura, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions, and I'm excited to keep partnering together.
Thank you very much. You have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.
You too.